The strangest thing about that night wasn't that I ended up sharing a taxi with my project manager at 2 in the morning. It wasn't even that she fell asleep on my shoulder somewhere between the airport and the hotel. The strangest thing was that none of it felt strange at all. Let me back up. I'd been working at Meridian for about 14 months when they sent me on my first real business trip. Not a day trip to Mississauga or a conference call from a hotel room in Hamilton. An actual trip. Calgary. 3 days. A client onboarding that had been rescheduled twice already, and they needed their two best people on it. Which is how I ended up on a Sunday evening flight with Petra Voss. Petra was 31. I was 28. She'd been at Meridian for 6 years. She had the kind of reputation that made junior employees lower their voices slightly when they talked about her. Not because she was cruel, but because she was precise. She didn't waste words. In 8 months of working on her team, I'd had exactly one conversation with her that wasn't about deliverables, and that was when she told me, very calmly, that I'd formatted a slide deck incorrectly and she'd need it redone by 9. I respected her. I was also, if I'm being honest, mildly terrified of her. The flight was at 7:15 out of Pearson. We met at the Air Canada check-in, said the usual professional things. Good weekend? Yeah, not bad. Flight looks on time, and then found our seats 3 rows apart and spent the next 4 hours doing exactly what you'd expect. She read something on her laptop. I listened to a podcast and stared out the window at the darkness over Lake Superior. We landed in Calgary at 9 local time. The client dinner was the next morning, so there was nothing to do but get to the hotel and sleep. I was waiting at the baggage carousel when Petra appeared beside me. "Did you book a car?" she asked. "Rideshare," I said. "You?" She held up her phone. The app was showing a 40-minute wait. Same, they're all surging. We looked at each other for a second. The carousel started moving. "We're at the same hotel," she said. "Yeah. Split it?" "Sure." That was the whole negotiation. A cab showed up in 12 minutes, one of the older guys who didn't work through the app, and we got in and gave him the hotel name, and that was that. For the first 5 minutes, neither of us said anything. She was looking at her phone. I was looking out the window at the Calgary skyline, the way it sits flat against the Rockies, even in the dark. Those mountains like a rumor in the distance. I'd never been to Alberta before. I didn't say that. It felt like the wrong thing to mention. Then Petra said, without looking up from her phone, "You nervous about tomorrow?" "A little," I said. "You?" She was quiet for a second. Then, "I hate client onboardings." I turned to look at her. That was not what I expected her to say. Really. They always want more than you can promise. And then you have to smile while you walk them back from all of it. She put her phone down on her lap. "It's tiring." "Is that why you wanted 2 people on this one?" She looked at me then. "Just briefly. I wanted you on this one because you're good at reading people and I'm not. I optimize for accuracy. You optimize for—" She tilted her head slightly. "Comfort maybe, it balances out." I didn't know what to say to that. It was possibly the most direct compliment anyone had ever given me at work. And it had been delivered with the same tone she used to ask about slide deck formatting. "Thank you," I said. It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. I'm going to take it as a compliment. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. Something adjacent to one. We were somewhere on Deerfoot Trail when she stopped answering my questions. I'd been asking about the client, what their pain points were, what she expected the pushback to be, and I noticed her responses getting shorter. 1 word, then half a word, then nothing. A stover in her head had dropped to the side, and she was asleep. Her shoulder pressed against mine, her breath slow and even. I stayed very still. The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. He didn't say anything, just raised his eyebrows slightly in the universal expression of, "So that's happening." I looked straight ahead. Here is the thing about sitting next to someone who is asleep. When you have spent 8 months being mildly afraid of them, you notice details you've never noticed before. The fact that she had a small scar near her left temple, the way she'd tucked her phone into her coat pocket instead of her bag, like someone used to being ready to leave quickly. The fact that she was, when she wasn't being precise, just a person who was tired. We pulled up to the hotel. I paid. I'd sort it out with expenses later. And I put my hand lightly on her arm. "Petra." Nothing. "Petra, we're here." She made a sound that was not language and shifted slightly. I said her name one more time, a little louder, and she opened her eyes. For a second, she looked completely disoriented. The way people do when they fall asleep somewhere unexpected and the world hasn't rearranged itself yet. Then she straightened up and looked at me and said in her completely normal voice, "We're at the hotel." Yeah, I fell asleep. A little. She looked at the driver. How long? 20 minutes maybe, he said. She nodded once like she was filing this information and got out of the cab. The hotel was a Marriott near the convention center. The kind of place that exists purely for business travel. All neutral tones and card key elevators and a lobby that smells vaguely of the same air freshener in every city. We checked in at the same desk. Our rooms were on different floors. We rode the elevator together in silence until her floor came up. She stepped out, then turned back. Get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow's going to be long. You too. The doors closed. I stood there, alone in the elevator, going up to the 11th floor and thought, that was the strangest cab ride of my life. The onboarding went fine. Better than fine, actually. Petra was right about the dynamic. She had every number, every timeline, every contingency ready before they could ask. And I sat across from the client's operations lead and did the thing where you make someone feel heard even when the answer to their question is no. That's not how this works. We wrapped by 2 in the afternoon, which was earlier than either of us expected. Good, Petra said, and the elevator backed down to the lobby. Good, I agreed. We had dinner reservations at a place near Stephen Avenue that the office had booked. Somewhere nicer than I'd usually pick for myself, the kind of restaurant where the menu is 2 pages and the wine list is 8. We planned to go separately, freshen up first, meet there at 7. There were 3 hours to fill. I went back to my room and called my mom for half an hour and watched a bit of the news and then put on my coat and went for a walk because I'd never been to Calgary and I figured I should at least see something other than a boardroom. I walked down to the Peace Bridge, the one over the Bow River, that strange curving red structure that doesn't look like it belongs in this city or any city. It was cold, mid-October, the wind off the mountains, the kind of cold that gets into your collar regardless of how you position your scarf. But there were still people out. Cyclists, a woman with a stroller, a couple of teenagers sitting on the railing in defiance of the temperature and good sense. I stood there for a while looking at the river and thinking about what Petra had said in the cab. You're good at reading people, and I'm not. I've been turning it over in my head all day. Not because it was flattering, though it was, but because it implied she'd been watching me long enough to form that opinion, and I'd had no idea. I got to the restaurant at 7:05. She was already there, at the bar, with what looked like a glass of white wine. She changed into something that wasn't a blazer. A dark sweater, something soft, and her hair was down. I'd never seen her with her hair down. I registered this and then very deliberately did not think about it. You're late, she said. By 5 minutes. I know. I'm giving you a hard time. She gestured at the bar stool beside her. They're not ready for us yet. I ordered a beer and we sat at the bar and talked. Really talked. Not about the client, not about Meridian, but about actual things. She'd grown up in Saskatoon. She'd wanted to be an architect before she got into project management. She had a younger brother in Vancouver who she talked to maybe twice a month, and it wasn't enough. But schedules were hard. I told her I was from Guelph, that I'd come to Toronto for school and just sort of stayed, that I had a vague plan to travel more but a vaguer commitment to actually executing it. Calgary's your first trip west? She asked. First trip anywhere for work. What do you think? I like the mountains, I said. Even just as an idea. Just knowing they're there. She looked at me in that sideways way she had. That's a weird thing to say. I know. I kind of like it. We had another drink before the table was ready, and then another with dinner. The food was good. She ordered the bison. I had the salmon. We each tried a bite of the others because she said you had to when you were this far west, and you'd ordered the wrong thing. The wine she chose for the table was a BC Pinot Noir, and it was genuinely one of the better glasses I'd had in a long time. By dessert, which we skipped, but the surfer brought little squares of something dark and chocolatey anyway, the way good restaurants do. The dynamic had shifted in a way I couldn't entirely name. We'd moved from colleagues at dinner to something else, not anything I could put a word to, just a different frequency. She ordered a digestive. I had coffee. And then she ordered another digestive. And I didn't say anything about that, and she didn't either. The restaurant was near the hotel. When we finally asked for the bill, it was almost 11, which neither of us had noticed, and outside it had gotten significantly colder and we were both underdressed for it. "Walk back?" she said. "Obviously." It was about 6 blocks. We walked quickly because of the cold and our breath made clouds, and she told me about the worst client onboarding she'd ever done. A company in Etobicoke where the CEO had decided on day 2 that he didn't like the software and wanted to switch to a competitor, and she'd had to spend the rest of the week convincing him otherwise. And I told her about the worst interview I'd ever had, which was for a job I didn't get and didn't want, and she laughed. Actually laughed. Not the polite acknowledgement of humor, but the real thing. Surprised out of her, we stopped at the hotel entrance, and for a second, neither of us moved toward the door. "That was nice," she said. "Yeah. The restaurant, I mean." "I know." She looked at me for a second longer than the sentence required, and then she pushed through the door, and I followed her in. In the elevator, something was different. Or maybe it had been different for hours, and I was only noticing now. The numbers ticked up. Her floor came first. She stepped out and turned back, same as last night. But this time she didn't say anything immediately. Then, for what it's worth, she said, "I'm not actually bad at reading people. I just don't usually want to know what I'll find." The elevator doors started to close. I put my hand out to stop them. "What did you find?" I asked. She held eye contact for a moment. Someone worth the risk of finding out. Then she took a step back and let the doors close. I stood there all the way up to 11, with my hand pressed flat against the cold metal wall of the elevator, and I thought, I am in a significant amount of trouble. I didn't sleep well. Not badly, exactly, just not deeply. The way you sleep when your mind is doing something you haven't given it permission to do and it's working through it without consulting you. I was up at 6:30. The meeting wasn't until 10. A follow-up call from the client's side, 15 minutes. We'd handle it from our rooms. I showered and made the weak hotel coffee, and stood at the window looking at the city waking up. The mountains were visible now, just barely. A pale shape at the edge of the sky. I thought about what she'd said in the elevator. I thought about it quite a lot. At 7:15, there was a knock at my door. I opened it and she was standing there in what was clearly a hotel bathrobe over her clothes. She'd pulled it off a chair or a hook in haste, I realized later, holding 2 paper cups from the Tim Hortons in the lobby. "They charge $4 for the in-room coffee," she said. "And it tastes like regret." I stepped back and let her in. She sat in the chair by the window. I sat on the edge of the bed. She handed me a cup. Medium. Double-double. Which was not how I took my coffee, but which I drank without saying anything, and we looked at the mountains together for a minute. "I've been thinking about what I said," she said. "Me too. I don't usually say things like that. I know. I'm your project manager. I know." She wrapped both hands around her cup. Outside, the sun was coming over the rooftops and catching the snow on the peaks in a way that was almost unreasonably beautiful for 7 in the morning. "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I want to be clear about that. You knocked on my door at 7 in the morning with Tim Hortons. The coffee is bad." "Petra," she looked at me. "I know what you're not suggesting," I said. "I'm not suggesting it either. I'm just sitting here with bad coffee, looking at mountains." Something shifted in her expression. The precision stayed, but something else came through underneath it. Something that had maybe been there all along and just hadn't had anywhere to go. "Okay," she said. "Okay." We sat there until 8. She told me about the first time she'd seen the Rockies properly. A camping trip at 16 Banff. Her father insisting they hike farther than any of them wanted to, and then the trail opening up into something so big she didn't have words for it. I told her about driving through Algonquin in the fall with my family when I was a kid. The way my dad pulled over on the highway because there was a moose in the ditch, and we all pressed our faces to the windows. Small things. True things. At 8:40, she stood up, said she needed to get ready for the call, took her cup to the door. After the call, she said, without turning around, "If you wanted to walk somewhere before the afternoon flight, I've never been to the Bow River Pathway, and apparently it's worth it." "I went last night," I said. "It's worth it." She nodded. Then she left. I sat there looking at the mountains for another 10 minutes. I thought, I don't know what this is. I thought, I don't need to know yet. I thought, She knocked on my door with coffee at 7 in the morning, and she stayed for an hour and 45 minutes, and neither of us is going to pretend that was about the in-room coffee. The call took 20 minutes. The client had two follow-up questions, both easy. Petra handled them in the way she handled everything. Completely, efficiently, leaving nothing unclear. When it ended, I texted her a single line. Pathway? She replied, lobby. 20 minutes. We walked for almost 2 hours. The path along the bow is long and flat, and the city opens up around you in a way that doesn't quite feel like a city anymore. Just sky and water and those mountains that sit on the edge of everything. We talked about work for maybe the first 15 minutes and then stopped, as if by agreement, and talked about everything else. She told me she'd almost quit Meridian twice. Once after a year, once after 4. Both times she'd stayed because leaving felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. What? I asked. That I was scared, she said, of starting over, of not being precise somewhere new, where no one knew yet that I was precise. You're precise everywhere, I said. It's not something you'd lose. She looked at me sideways. That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me in a professional context. It wasn't a compliment, I said. It was an assessment. She stopped walking. I kept a straight face. She started walking again, faster, and I caught up, and we were both not quite smiling in the way that is somehow better than smiling. At a certain point, we stopped at a bench and sat down and watched the river. A pair of Canada geese moved through the shallows near the bank with the absolute authority of creatures that have never doubted themselves. The mountains were very clear today. No haze, their edges sharp against the blue. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. If I weren't your project manager, if we just met somewhere, at a party or a coffee shop or whatever, would you have… She stopped. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a second. Without me finishing the question, you were going to ask if I'd have said something to you, made some indication. Yes, I would have. She looked at the river. The geese had moved further along. I figured, she said. I just wanted to hear you say it. Why? Because I would have too. A pause. Eventually. I optimize. Eventually. I optimize for accuracy, not speed. I laughed. Actually laughed. And she looked at me, and this time she didn't try to not smile. She just let it happen. And it changed her face completely. I understood in that moment why she kept it contained. It was the kind of smile that made you want to do something to earn it again immediately. We stayed on the bench a little longer than we needed to. On the way back, she mentioned that her company phone needed a new case. She'd cracked the corner of the current one, and we stopped at a shop on Stephen Avenue and spent 20 minutes debating the merits of different options, which was somehow the most comfortable 20 minutes of the whole trip. Normal and small and easy. At the hotel, we collected our bags and shared a cab to the airport. The flight was at 4:15. We made it with 40 minutes to spare. At the gate, she opened her laptop and I put my headphones in, and we were, technically, back to being colleagues on a work trip. But at some point, she took out a granola bar and broke it in half and held one half out to me without looking up from her screen. And I took it. And neither of us acknowledged this. Because some things don't need to be acknowledged. They just are. On the plane, she sat one row ahead of me, different seats than the way out. An hour into the flight, she reclined her seat back slightly, and I watched her shoulders drop, and I thought, she is going to fall asleep again. And she did, within 20 minutes. I couldn't see her from my seat. I just knew. We landed at Pearson just after 9. The baggage claim was slow. We waited beside each other in that low-grade exhaustion of late Sunday night airports. Neither of us talking much. And when her bag came off the belt first, I grabbed it before she could, and she looked at me, and for a second, I thought she was going to make a point of taking it back. She didn't. Outside the terminal, the temperature had dropped since we'd left October in Toronto. The kind of cold that announces winter is no longer theoretical. We stood at the taxi rank and she said, I'm in Leslieville? Riverdale, I said. That's not far. No. Another cab. The city at night. The gardener coming into it from the west. The lake black and flat to the south. Familiar things. After 3 days of unfamiliar ones. She leaned her head back against the seat. Not against my shoulder this time, but close enough that I was aware of the space between us. I have to think about some things, she said. Okay. Not because I don't, She stopped. Just because I have to be sure I'm thinking clearly and not just Calgarying it, I said. She turned her head to look at me. Is that a verb now? It is for me. I'm not Calgarying it, she said. I just need a beat. Take whatever beat you need. She looked at me for another second. Then she faced forward again. You're very easy to be around, she said. Do you know that? You're not, I said. For the record. I know. But I mean that as a compliment. I know that too. Her stop came first. The driver pulled over on Queen East and she got out and I handed her bag out after her and she stood on the sidewalk and looked up at me through the open door. Monday, she said. Monday, I agreed. She closed the door. The cab pulled away. I watched her in the side mirror until the street curved and she was gone. Here is what I know about Monday. She arrived at the office before me, which was normal. She had her usual coffee, her usual laptop, her usual precision. In the morning stand-up, she ran through the status update without looking at me more than she looked at anyone else. And then, around 11, she sent me a message on Teams. There's a place on King Street I've been meaning to try. Friday after work, if you're not busy. I read it twice, then I typed, I'm not busy. She didn't reply right away. I imagined her at her desk reading that, maybe doing the thing where the corner of her mouth moves without quite becoming a smile. 3 minutes later, good. That was all. That was enough.